Hello, welcome to the PhD Life Raft podcast. I'm Emma Brzezinski, and this episode I am talking to Chloe Lee, who's just gone into her third year of study, and asking her all about what she wished she had known when she was starting out. We talk about structuring your week, we talk about balancing the PhD with life outside of that, but we also talk about being a PhD student in a time of coronavirus, and how to sign your emails and turn that into an act of kindness. So I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello, Chloe.
Hello, Emma.
So before we start, I have to confess that we know each other.
Yes.
And we started working together through the TechNay programme. And I have always been really impressed by your level of self-reflection, your really courageous spirit. I think that you're awesome.
You.
And also, I think your real commitment, not only to your own work, but to helping other people, that is just a beautiful thing. And I am so pleased that you have said yes to come and talk to everyone here, because you have a lot of wisdom to share, I know.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
And usually I start interviews by asking people to talk about their own experience of the PhD, but this one is all about your own experience of PhD.
Yeah.
And so you're just coming into your third year now.
Yes.
And you're doing a practice-based PhD, which I'm sure you'll talk a little bit more about as well. But I just asked you if you would mind talking about what you wish you'd known when you were starting your PhD. And you have actually been the perfect podcast guest because you've given me this fantastic list of things. So I am just going to ask you about the things that you have that you've identified, because they're really, really clear and really, really helpful.
Good.
So the first thing that you said in terms of what you wish you'd known when you were starting your PhD was about structure and self-motivation.
Yeah. I think it's the biggest hurdle, really. I think, I went straight through. I had a bit of working in between my master's and my start of my PhD, but I definitely, did it within quite a small amount of time. And I think you think you're used to, structuring your time, but I think you get lulled into a sense of security, really, because it is completely different. And the structure in your time just seems like the start and end of the other challenges that I probably am going to talk about today. There's just so much to do, consume, read, write, people to meet, things to kind of get involved in. Practically, I think looking at your calendar, having stuff in there, scheduling in rewards. We've talked about that in the past before, and I've actually found that so helpful. And especially scheduling in rewards, not necessarily after kind of, you've achieved something specifically, but more about work done. I think you've talked about that before.
Yeah.
And that's helpful because it's not just a case of, well, I do work, and if I get this feedback, or if I do this, if it meets this mark, then I can treat myself. It's actually more about, I've done all of that work. So however that turns out, actually I've, put in a lot and invested. So therefore it's completely rational for me to kind of schedule in some nice things to do with people that you like and you love. So yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's celebrating yourself, celebrating that you achieved what you set out to achieve.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, doing things, building in those breather times after supervisions or things like that are really helpful for me. I actually did some part-time work when I was definitely in my first year, and I think that's really helpful. I know for some people maybe that's not the right thing, but for me it meant that I could focus on something completely different that didn't impact my life in any big way. I just turned up to work. I worked at the university on like their kind of help desk for students that were staying on campus, and it just gave me a few hours, also paid, but then didn't have to think about, you know, these big things that I was trying to look at in my PhD. That was helpful. I think it's definitely more difficult to structure your week. I think it's quite easy, and well, I found it slightly easier to structure a year or a term, but structuring your week, I'm not so good at. And I've had to experiment, been forced to do that, especially in our current context, obviously, going through the coronavirus pandemic. You know, that kind of thing that you're used to of going into campus or going to a coffee shop or something completely changed. So
yes, I think that you said about getting a job. I actually, had a moment where I thought I am completely losing my mind, and went and did some actually volunteer work. But I think it's that thing, isn't it, of having to be somewhere with clothes on at a certain time, you know, kind of that it does give purpose, structure, and a release. I was actually able to talk to people and be with people. That for me was a big thing in terms of being out of the house, talking to people. But as you say, actually now at the moment, going out of the house maybe isn't so much of an option, and therefore again makes sort of structuring and managing your time and the rhythm of your time more difficult. Have you found any useful tips for what you've been doing?
I mean, definitely daily walk has helped. Making sure you eat at the same time, making sure you have your coffee at the same time, that's helped. Trying to do a bit of exercise as much as you can. I mean, it's all a bit of a balance, because obviously you don't want to end up bashing yourself for not doing those things. But in the same vein, having kind of this structure does I think make you more productive in the times you then set aside to do work in. Whether if you just start a day and you kind of, you know, it's so easy how you fall into, I guess, those bad habits of starting a week going, right, what am I going to do this week? Oh, do my PhD.
Yes. I mean, it's crazy, isn't it? I'm going to sit down at this computer and to do my, blimey, the weight of that on you. So I think that sense of really, like you say, structuring and being really clear on, I'm going to sit down to do this. That's what I'm sitting down to do.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And so, I mean, it's hard because, you know, you can kind of say, I'll structure a week, and it feels a bit loose. But I think, you know, hopefully if you can spend some time to reflect on what, you know, helps you, and know that structure is a good thing, I think that's definitely helpful, because it does turn into this kind of seamless professional, personal. And actually, whilst the PhD can be like a part of your stuff that you are interested in and like and maybe do anyway if you're practice based, also I think you're totally valid to have those set times where, like, this is my work stuff and this is my life stuff, and to put in those almost structuring methods. We've talked about having literally a different hat or a different pair of glasses. I remember you saying about someone told you once, for different tasks. And I think that helps. You know, if you can do a physical thing, it might help you with the structure. Maybe, you know, if you write out a diary, that might not necessarily hold you fast. But if you have work clothes that then you put on, that might structure your day. So it's like structure on a macro scale and structure on a micro scale. And I think certain people are going to find certain things, the macro, more difficult than the micro. For me, it's the micro that I think is more difficult.
Yeah. And you mentioned there is, in terms of doing the practice work and then doing the more theoretical work, how have you found that in terms of structuring that and balancing those out?
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, I think with me, my practice work takes place in a school. So there was quite obvious times when I'd go into school and that would be my practice-based time. I think with my practice-based, I couldn't just do a bit of practice, a bit of theory. I had to kind of set aside whole days for practice, because I can't get into that mindset in like a very tight frame of time. And so that's how I did it. But I'm quite new to practice, or at least with my PhD, it was the first time I'd done more practice-based things. So it was quite new for me. I think maybe if you have a different form of practice, you might have this kind of more weaving or braiding together of your theory and practice that might work more for your structure. You've got to just respond to that, I think.
Yeah, well, I think that point that you make is really important as well, in terms of transitioning into different kind of thinking and different kind of doing, and allowing time for that as well, that you're not going to just sit down and get straight back into that work, or get, be able to jump from one thing to another. It's the kind of transitions and how you manage that becomes really important, I think.
Yeah. And I think we think, I think we know in our kind of community, or at least in the small community that I've been working with, PhD peers and in Techne, that we know that rest is good. Like, we totally know that. But what the transition times in and out of that space are a lot more fuzzy and blurred. Like, it takes a while to come down out of your work head into your rest place. And I think we think that we're set up in today's context to just snap into rest, because we know it's good, and that can always become a sense of urgency and a stress in itself. Like, I haven't had my rest time this week, or I haven't been able to come down. But you need to allow yourself, whether that's like physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, to get into that space. And so that in itself can take up time. And it's just being almost realistic about it and rational about it. I think we can get caught up in the kind of, I can talk about emotions and things like that all day long, but sometimes actually it's just about being rational. Like, you can't start to unpack all these really complex topics and then expect to just snap out of it when the clock hits 5.
No, exactly. No, I was just talking to Alex Pang, who wrote the Rest book, and which was amazing to talk to him. And he has so many smart things in that book and about transitions. And one of the things he talks about that in terms of transitions is kind of leaving a hook that you come back into.
Oh, I like that.
So that and I try and do that in my work actually now, in terms of, not when things are going well, that's when you stop. When you're really in flow, you kind of to stop, rather than kind of finishing something off, because then when you come back to it, you're in the middle of the flow rather than having to start something. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I think it's brilliant. But then, like you say, in terms of coming out of that too, what's your hook to come out of? Is there a kind of, and like you say, I think having something that signals it to your brain at a deeper level, and that might be a sensory thing, it might be getting changed, or having a different perfume, or whatever it is, that then it's kind of, and now you're transitioning into rest rather than just I'm straight into rest.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I love it. Love that.
Well, that is great. So this stuff about structuring, brilliant. Macro and micro structuring, I love that. So the second thing you talked about, the second bullet point, which is kind of massive. But it would just to touch on this idea of self-care, mental health. Talk a bit about that.
I mean, it's a huge one. I mean, it's a big one, and it kind of does, leak out of the first one. I feel like these two really feed into each other. If you're able to structure and put healthy boundaries in, then it should, maintain your mental health and keep it at a good, in a healthy place. And I think it is really dependent on character and things like that. And I mean, I'm in my mid-20s, and I'm going through a time where I'm still exploring things in myself, and like fully kind of coming to terms with some things that have happened to me personally, and that does require quite a lot of energy and work, and to do that alongside the PhD is a big thing. And so you do have to make sure that you have these outlets for certain things, whether that be physical, emotional. I mean, I don't think you can really underestimate a run or a walk without a phone. I think it's really good, and it's the thing that I always go back to. And it's that thing of, well, have you had a lot of water to drink today? Like, they're really simple things, and we so easily kind of put them aside. And actually, the really kind of base things, I think, are really useful and good. And sometimes we think we're kind of almost above those, or that we can push on through, and actually we don't need to. There's no one tracking that. I think if you need to take 10 minutes to kind of walk around the block, or if you need to actually properly get into some things with a friend, that's great and good. And also it can help you in your work. I think, you know, it's not about looking after your mental health so that you can do your PhD, you know.
Yes. Now that's really important, and I think what you said there about you're going through life processes and doing the PhD at the same time, and your life doesn't have to be on hold until this is finished. This is part of your personal development. This is part of kind of you going forward, and actually giving time for your life work is really, really important. Really important. And as you say, remembering that you are not just a brain on a stick, you are actually a body and a spirit and all of that needs attention.
And I think it is hard, I think, you know, doing a PhD for that to flourish, because obviously, as you know, and as I've had direct experience with, you know, looking after yourself is not necessarily like something that's really pushed in some places in academia. It's just it's not really considered important, or necessarily, you know, it's considered more about that person's responsibility. And I think people are starting to outgrow that. But I think in order to do that yourself, obviously the work starts with yourself, but it also starts in the way that you're conducting yourself. And I think I came across really, really great email signature the other day from someone. I think I was just on Instagram and I came across it, and it. So, you know, your normal sign off on email, who you are, what you do, blah blah, your contact details, and then underneath it said, if you're receiving this email during outside of your working times, or you have a workload that's too big to deal with this right now, please don't feel the need to respond to this straight away when you receive it, as you read it. And so I just was like, if I can put that at my email as someone who's just starting out, working out where they, you know, how they occupy space in this place, then if I can signal to a lecturer or someone technically higher up in the hierarchy than me that I'm aware that their time is valuable, then hopefully then when they're dealing with me or other students, they'll also know that. So I think a bit of it is also, you know, trying to create a bit of that culture, you know, obviously in relation to the energy that you have at that time. An email signature takes 2 minutes to write out, and actually you never know what someone on the end of that is going through. And, you know, admin staff, all of those people that are receiving emails from students or anyone in that world, I think deserve to know that their time is precious, as your time is precious.
I love that. And I love that sense of those kind of little radical acts of kindness, isn't it? Radical acts of just shifting something and signaling something different. That is fantastic. Brilliant. Awesome. So, of course, that's a much bigger discussion around mental health and self-care, of course. But I think that sense of really of your commitment to that, I think, comes through, and some lovely ideas in there as well. So, because I want to get all of your ideas. I really want to, pick your brains. So the next thing you have then is about, I love this title, is experimentation, experience, and personal development.
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely one of those people that if you said this to me, I'd be like, oh yeah, oh yes, personally develop. And it does sound a bit cheesy, but you know, it can be in those small things of just talking to other people in your department. It can be having a chat over coffee. It can be saying, oh, have you read this? It'd be great to discuss this. You know, I found myself organising a student conference with Techne, which is actually a really good experience, not to be sniffed at. And
it was a fantastic conference.
Yeah, thank you. I know that you might have showed up at some point. And also made sure that I kind of, you know, got to know some other people that were in the Techne group. And we're still talking and chatting now and still sharing work now. And it can get very kind of that, it can feel quite isolated. And often I think these personal development sessions that are on offer and often get kind of not filled up are a chance to just talk with someone else about their work, and that can spark your own thoughts. But it's also just about having a bit of a community and pushing yourself a little bit, even if they're things that you don't think are necessarily relevant. Yes. I think it's really good to just have a few things in the diary, and then that also, you know, helps structure your time. If you know you've got a writing retreat, or you know you've got how to put your research online, or whatever it is. And sometimes the content, even though the content is often good, it's not necessarily the only thing that you get out of those sessions.
No, I think there's a brilliant book around, the title escapes me, but I'll put it in the show notes, about entering academic culture and this kind of process of enculturation. And I think that what you're talking about there is that gorgeous way that you can just start to ease yourself into that, find your community, find your way in. And like you say, that might not be directly related to your study, but actually it's going to give you all sorts of skills. It's going to help you. You can watch how other people operate. You can find out what they're doing. I think there are real benefits to that, and it gets you out of the house. That's always good.
Again.
But I think I've really admired that in you, in terms of
a bit lost around Senate House looking for a session. I mean, yeah.
But I think it's great because, you know, you might end up then having your Viva in Senate House, and at least you've been there a few times. You know what that is, and I think that you can't overestimate that, really. And I think that you have been brilliant in terms of seizing those opportunities, and allowing yourself that kind of breadth of experience, I think, really.
Yeah, no, I definitely would recommend going to things, even if they feel slightly left field. I mean, I think people do sign up when they initially start their PhD to kind of the, you know, essential ones, things like writing a literature review and bits and bobs like that. But if there's things that just on a personal level interest you, you know, they do things quite a lot on character or professional, you know, Enneagram or Myers-Briggs, things like that. That's just like, you know, just really interesting to kind of engage with. So yeah, I would definitely recommend getting involved in that way.
Brilliant. And then the final one. You tell us what the final title is.
I mean, I guess I've got it in my bullet point as a PhD is a big deal.
Yeah.
And then shoved a lot of words alongside that. But I
love it. The PhD is a big deal.
Yeah, I think it's just, you know, insofar as you're taking 4 years, and it is a privilege to explore a question, to kind of have a play, to learn, to kind of be able to make your mark. And even if, you know, you don't go on to, you know, academia or use it in that kind of obvious, explicit way, you're going to be using all those skills that you learn. And I think it's helpful to know that it's challenging and really know that it's challenging. I mean, if you're doing a PhD, I don't know if it was you that told me or someone else, you know, quite a few, usually if you're doing a PhD, it's because you've been a high achiever for most of your life, at least for most of your school life. You're in a position where you've been able to apply and compete for one, perhaps. And so you kind of think, oh, well, this is what I can do or meant to be doing. And I know it's going to be hard, but actually it is hard.
Yeah.
I think we're quite good at going, oh yeah, it is challenging and it is hard. But actually, maybe what I'd wished I'd known is actually, yeah, Chloe, it is actually going to be quite challenging. You are going to struggle. You are going to get feedback all the time that's not going to make you feel on top of the world. But also there's so much other stuff that comes with it. And being able to separate, again, the personal from the professional is important, even though with a lot of the PhD, especially practice, I think it does bleeds into other areas of your life. So in a kind of roundabout way, I guess it's knowing that it's a big thing to sink your teeth into, but also, I mean, I always love what you say about it, eating the elephant one bite at a time. Knowing that quite often what you're doing in your PhD will impact what you're doing in your life, and what you're doing in your life will quite often impact what you're doing in your PhD, but it's not the same thing, and they're not equivalent partners. You know, they're not. And it's, I think I had a chat with my supervisors the other day, and, you know, especially with coronavirus, talking about extensions, and obviously my anxiety and urgency in making sure I can get an extension, and all these things. And, you know, one of my supervisors said to me, you know, the PhD is 4 years. Like, the idea is to complete it in 4 years. It's not to let it tumble on and on. It is a bounded exercise. It's a temporally bound exercise, in the same way that an exam is an hour and a half and not like longer than 5 or 6 hours. I know there are some exams that are longer than that, but, you know, there's a point, because it's to show what you can do within that time. And I think it's just because it's that extended time that sometimes those boundaries get blurred, and we often talk about our PhD before we talk about, you know, how are you? Oh, my PhD is going all right, rather than actually, how are you?
And that can be a real challenge, like you say. And I think it is, especially as your identity may well have been bound up with you being, as we say, that high achiever, that person who is smart, top of the class, all of that. And then you're finding yourself in a situation where perhaps those old coping mechanisms are not working so much anymore, and you're exploring a whole different set of skills, and that can feel really devastating. So that reminder is really useful in terms of sort of separating that out and going, this is a job of work that I'm doing. It's my job. And I am something separate from that.
Definitely. And I think the way to help you do that is definitely in the way you structure, the way you change your environment. You know, that all can help. And so I'm reading through what I wrote to you also, and I'm kind of saying, I've said like this idea of space making and space taking. Like, I think the PhD can be space making. Like, it can offer you paths, avenues, doors, windows into things that open up your sense of, yourself, but also other things that you want to look at. But it can also be space taking, and sometimes I think that's difficult to discern at what point something becomes space taking. And I think just being sensitive to that change is really, really key. I
love that space.
If that makes sense.
That's a really gorgeous metaphor in terms of the space making and the space taking. And I think that sense of taking control and putting yourself in the driving seat is really important, isn't it? In kind of like you say, being aware of what's going on, which is, I think you are brilliant at that, really smart about that. Thank you so much. What a lot of wisdom there. Can I be really unkind? Because I usually ask people for one top tip to take away.
A top tip.
It might just be repeating one of your things, but
a top tip: buy a list pad.
Oh, love that.
On whatever, from whatever retailer that you like. But yeah, list pads, they're great. Keep your tasks short, keep them small. They're helpful.
That's brilliant. Any recommendation that involves stationery is a winner in my book. I love it. Chloe, thank you so much for your time. Good luck with year 3.
Thank you.
And navigating the really tricky stuff that's ahead of you, I know, in terms of navigating the whole COVID and practice element. And thank you all for listening, and I will see you next time.